In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the workflow between Maxon Cinema 4D and Adobe After Effects CC. The great news is, if you're an After Effects CC customer, you actually have access to Cinema 4D Lite as part of your suite. You may not know it, but in this movie I'm going to show you how you access it and how you can do really cool stuff without having to buy anything additional. Of course, you can always upgrade to more powerful versions of Cinema 4D, but you can do a lot with the existing Cinema 4D Lite that you have if you're an After Effects CC customer. So what we're going to do in this tutorial, it's going to be a fairly lengthy tutorial, but I'm going to show you an awful lot of stuff, and after you've seen it you should be able to work with the two tools to create similar kinds of effects. So here's an example what we're going to do. I've basically got a piece of footage which is this simple pan of a stadium, and in that I'm then taking that to Cinema 4D, adding this cup and animating it. We're also going to add shadows. We're going to animate some text, a logo and some ordinary text, and create this final effect or something along those lines. And I'm also going to show you various workflow enhancements and benefits to working in the way that I'm going to show you. So there we go, there's the movie. So I'm just going to delete that from the project, and then I'm going to load in that piece of footage. So here it is, and I'll just drag that into the scene. And I've got my display quality just set to half, so this isn't going to show super quality, and you could also change the magnification or whatever you want, but just to make it calculate a little bit quicker. So we'll just have a quick look. So there is the basic piece of footage. Now, a common problem that people have is, okay, I have a piece of filmed footage or something that is just an ordinary movie like this MP4, and I somehow need to get 3D objects into it. So in my case, I want it to have a 3D logo. I want to have that cup land on the, or appear to land on the actual floor. So how do I do it? It's actually pretty simple now with the workflow that's built in and the built-in tools in After Effects CC. So let's show you it. So the first thing that we need to do is, I'm just going to scrub to a point like about there, and it's very easy to get the tracking data now with After Effects because there's a brilliant built-in tool. You right click on the layer here and choose Track Camera, and what that does is it analyzes the background here, so it analyzes in the background and it looks for tracking points, and you'll see up here it's calculating all of these, and this will take longer or shorter depending on the size of the movie that you've got, and then it will attempt to solve the camera. So this sequence just takes a short while, so it won't take long here. And then when we have that, you'll see that it generates all of these tracking points that we can then utilize. So the ones that I'm interested in the movie that I had, I land the cup, or appear to land the cup, bang on the center circle, so just here. So you can move around and just choose ones that appear to be where you want them. And then I'm going to choose two different things. If you then right click on your mouse, you can have access to these menus. And the first one that I'm going to choose is Set Ground Plane and Origin. And basically how Cinema 4D will use that is it will say, right, that's the center of the Cinema 4D scene that you're going to generate. The other thing that I want is I need some sort of camera and a reference object called a null object. So if we right click again, you can see you can create all these different things, and the one I'm interested in is create a null and a camera. When we do that, they then appear in the comp down here. So we have the 3D tracker camera and we have this track null. So a null, if we select it and then just scrub in the timeline, you can see we've basically now got a reference point that's an invisible object, but it has coordinate information, and in this case it's nicely lined up perfectly with this line coming off. So I've done a nice selection there with the tracking points, which is great. If it is slightly off, what you can do is just move here and go into the which way is it, transform, yeah, position modes or rotations, and change how this is done just by moving the sliders and just slightly adjust it. So for example, I could change just that one there just to move it slightly more to the center. So if it's not quite right, you can do some fine tweaks like so. So we've got all of that, which is great, and then of course we need to get that somehow into Cinema 4D. So how do we do that? Well, there was always workflow to After Effects in previous versions of After Effects and Cinema 4D, but what is really cool now is it is actually built in to the main menus. You don't have to add any extra plugins, and you'll find it under Export. And there is the Maxon Cinema 4D exporter. Now the cool thing is you also get a version of Cinema 4D built in with After Effects. So when you hit this, it'll create a Cinema 4D file that you could load into ordinary Cinema 4D if you already own that tool, but if you don't, you can load it into Cinema 4D Lite. So the first thing we do is choose the Cinema 4D exporter, and we choose a location. So I'm just going to chuck mine on the desktop. So I'm going to call this, I don't know, a demo, and hit save. So initially nothing happens. So you're like, great, what do I do now? Double click in your project, go find it and open it, and then all you need to do is drag it into the comp, and I'm going to put it above the original movie layer. And what you should then see is this basic outline here, and you see this line here that should, if you've done things correctly, line up nicely with a bit of footage that you're trying to match, and that looks spot on to me. You also have access to various render settings of Cinema 4D, which we will go into in a little bit, but you can change the render settings, display, and all sorts of stuff here, which is really cool, and I'm going to show you why that's powerful in a little while. So we've got all of that, and now of course we need to edit this inside Cinema 4D. So how do we do this? Well, it's the same process as pretty much anything like a PSD file or anything. You make sure it's selected, the layer, and you choose Edit, Edit Original. And that will then either load it into Cinema 4D Lite if you don't own Cinema 4D already, because that's installed with After Effects at CC, or if you have a version of Cinema 4D, it will load that one, or you can choose. So that's up to you. So we're now inside Cinema 4D Lite. Now you may think, well, what on earth have I got here? Well, if you look on the right here, this is the Objects Manager, and if we just click on this little plus icon, we have different things in here. So this is basically a group of objects, and inside here we have the two things that we had from After Effects. We have the 3D tracker camera and the track null. So if I select the track null, you can see it's there. And we also have this 3D tracker camera that's already active. You can see this little icon here means we're looking through that camera, and if we hit play, we have that camera movement. It also sets up the aspect ratios and size of this scene to match your After Effects scene, which is really, really useful. So I'll just rewind this here. So let's see what we can actually do with this. What we also need to do is have something in the background, and although you can keep flicking from Cinema 4D to After Effects, the preview rate in Cinema 4D for adding 3D and looking at movies and stuff is really, really fast. So I'm going to work inside Cinema 4D. So the first thing I need to do is get the movie in. So I'm going to create a new material, and over here, I can either work over here or I can double click if I prefer an open window. So I quite like an open window. And then I choose a texture path. So I load an image, go to my desktop, and I'm going to go into the AE demo, and I'm going to load in a TIFF sequence. If you work with a TIFF sequence, there's no work really that Cinema 4D has to do to display that sequence. So TIFF sequences are really nice. You can work with movies and QuickTimes and those sort of things, but they may chug a little bit in the display. So TIFF sequence will give you really fast preview rate, which you'll see here. So I load in the first one, choose open. There's not a copy of it. Do I want to create a copy of it? I don't, so I'm just going to say no. And the second thing you need to do is click on that little thumbnail there, choose animation, and you can change the movie frame rate if you want. I think, well, this original one was actually 30 frames a second, so I'm going to leave that as it is, but you can change it. And you click the calculate button, and then Cinema 4D will match this so it's all nice and plays inside the project. So I'll close that down. I have this material now, and I need to put it on a background. So Cinema 4D comes with a variety of different objects that you can use, and if you drag on any of these, you will have access to a sub-menu, so you should be familiar with that. It's very similar with Adobe applications. And then just release the button on the background object, and that is added to your object manager here. We then drag and drop the material onto the background object, and hey presto, we are all lined up and ready to go. So if we hit play, we have the camera movement, it's all nicely matched, and now we can start adding our 3D elements, which is awesome. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do here is add the cup to the scene. So you can access things in various different ways. You can use file merge and find the cup that way, but Cinema 4D has a really cool content browser here, and if I go to computer and I'll go and find my desktop, and the reason why I say this is really cool is because if you have movies or scenes or Cinema 4D scenes, if you scale this up, it'll give you a preview of each thing that you've got. So it's quite nice to be able to get these things. So I'm going to use the cup. So when you work with motion graphics, particularly with 3D objects, chances are that your deadlines are very tight. And although you can model things from scratch, it's often much faster to just go and get a preset model of what you want to buy. So there's various websites that will sell you 3D models. The one that I've got here originally came from TurboSquid, so that's one, for example, but there are many others on the market. Just search 3D models, and Cinema 4D Lite and the other Cinema 4Ds can load in many different types of model types. So this one, though, I've taken in and then saved it as a Cinema 4D file for future use. So I wanted a model of a cup. So I drag that onto the objects and into the objects manager, and there is my cup in the scene. Okay, so the cool thing is that that's put bang in the center of the scene. If I want, I can line it up with a track null. If they look any different, I don't think there's much difference. But if you want to line it up perfectly with the track null, you can. You just drag and drop it onto the track null, and I can see this is actually slightly off of the track null. So I can just change that to 0, 0. And that is bang on where that track null from After Effects is, and then I'll just drag it back out of it again. Oops, put it in the background there. So we've got the cup in the scene there, which is nice. The other thing that I want to do with it is scale up the cup. So really nice with 3D objects is you can move them and rotate them and scale them up to any size. So this is one of the big benefits of working in 3D. You can also change where things are scaled from, but in this case the cup scaling is done from the base of the cup, so that's been set up. So if we scale up, I just drag to the right and I can have this cup at whatever scale I want. So I'm just going to have it about like so. And the other problem that you can see here is the cup is black. Why is the cup black? Well, we've got material on it, which is this metal material, so I'm just going to hit render. And one thing you may see is it may not know where a texture path is. So if you get that, what we do is look at the material, and we can see in this case in the environment, if we click in here, this is a layered material, and in here was a bitmap. If I look at the bitmap, I can see that it knows that there was a texture, but it doesn't know where it is. So I just need to go and find that. So I go back to my desktop and I go into the demo here, whoops, and I've got the texture here, and I'll just load that in. I won't keep a copy of it, that's fine. So now it knows where it is, so I've just corrected that path. There are texture managers and stuff to help you find lost textures, and this is particularly problematic if you pull textures from other things, but there we go, that's a typical thing you can run into. That's how you can fix it. So if we now hit the render button, this is the render button, we see we have this nice material on the cup, and we have some problems to solve here. But the first thing was, okay, well, why is there such a big difference between the editor and the renderer? And one of the things that you can do if you're using things like reflections or shadows or transparencies, if you have a reasonable graphics card, you can go to options here, turn on enhanced OpenGL, and that will give you things like environments. So this is a simulated reflection. It's using the environment channel just for speed, really, just to give an idea that the cup is metal. But you can also turn on things like shadows and transparencies, and we'll have a look at how that works in a moment. So that's quite cool to have. You don't need a super duper graphics card. Most graphics cards that support OpenGL will display this stuff quite nicely. Okay, so the other thing that I want to do here is, of course, when we render this scene, there are no shadows, and this is a typical thing. Some people are going, well, I can kind of get it matched, so there's a cup on the pitch, but there's no shadows, so it doesn't look quite right. So how can you simulate those shadows if we've only got a flat movie? How on earth can we solve that? Well, there are a variety of different ways of doing it. I'm going to show you my solution to it. What of course I need first of all is something to put a shadow on. So I can't really put it on the movie because we don't know whereabouts that is, that movie, although we've got some tracking data. But what we can do is create what I'm going to use is a plane. So I'm going to drag here and choose a plane. So Cinema 4D Lite gives you lots of basic tools. You can't do full polygon modeling, but you have lots of basic tools that you can manipulate, such as these basic shapes here. And we also have some other tools which I'll show you in a minute. But we've got the plane in the scene, and then we drag just to scale it up. And if you stop and then drag again, the drag's kind of relative, the scale of it. So once you've got a bigger plane, if you stop and then drag again, you'd get a bigger scale up. Hit render now, and we've got this big dark floor here. So what we then need to do from this point is create a light. So we need some sort of light to cast shadows, and you can have as many lights as you want, and the lights are accessed here. There's different lights. I'm just going to use for speed an ordinary light. And when that's in the scene, I'm going to use the move tool and drag it up this axis. And one of the problems that you can have is when you're working in preview mode, you get a fall off of the light. Excuse me. But what you don't have is immediately where shadows are cast. The first thing, of course, is to turn on shadows. And one of the nice things about Cinema 4D, whenever you choose an object, the attributes will always show here. And inside here, you can turn on the main parts of a light on the main page. So although Cinema 4D is very, very powerful, it tries to give you, or it's designed to give you, the basic settings on the first tab, and then if you need extra power and extra functionality, you can go into some of these other settings and other tabs down here if you want to. For the most part though, when you're starting, you just want to do things like, I want a shadow. What sort of shadow do you want? Do you want a hard shadow, a soft shadow, or an area shadow, which is kind of a combination? It starts very hard and tapers off to very soft. I'm going to use a hard shadow just for this example for speed, because they're really quick to calculate. And if we hit render, we can see we've got a shadow, but of course that's a bit of a pain. I'm hitting render to see the shadow, and although this scene's really quick, on a more complicated scene that might take a little while. What is quite cool as well is under that enhanced OpenGL, you also have the option to turn on shadows. And if I do that, and I'm now actually in the editor view, and I'm seeing shadows in real time. That means if I grab the light source and move it around, I'll see how that shadow is affected in the scene, which again is very nice to have that. So I've got the shadow here, and if I hit render, it's actually very close to what I had already, which is really nice. So we've got a bit, oh, excuse me, that's my squeaky chair. We've got that stuff in the scene. So what happens now if we look inside After Effects? Let's have a quick look. So I'm just going to save that, and I'm going to go and flick to After Effects. What we see, and this is awesome, is that the scene is automatically updated inside After Effects, so I have that extra information. I can also see I've got some problems, one of which, this looks a bit different to what I was seeing in Cinema 4D, and that's because the rendering mode is set to software. If I change it to final, I'll start seeing it similar to what I was seeing inside Cinema 4D. But that's really cool that I haven't had to re-import anything or export anything, it's all in there straight away. So let's go back to Cinema 4D and carry on working. So there's my Cinema 4D, and what I want to do from this point is, I've got a shadow, which is great, I've got a cup, which is great, but I've now got this weird, plane that I'm using to get that shadow, and I don't really want to see that. I want to see the original footage, but I still want that shadow. So there are various different tricks you can do to get those that information into After Effects so you can work with it. The first thing that I need to do is look at the cup, and I want to add a tag. And the tag that is really, really useful for working with After Effects is called the compositing tag. It's also really useful if you're working just with Cinema 4D. The compositing tag will give you a variety of options. You can say only cast shadows, only receive shadows, only be seen by the camera, only be seen by global illumination, do different anti-aliasing settings, blah, 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 blah. But the really cool thing is this, the object buffer. What the object buffer will do is create me basically a separate layer that I can use as a mask. So anything on that you select to be in this buffer will then be, you'll have a mask layer that you can use inside After Effects or Photoshop or whatever application you're going out to if you set things up correctly. So what I've basically done there is I've said for the cup, give me that cup, give me a mask for it, so an object buffer. The other thing that you need to do to make sure that's set up is go into your render settings, and we use this multipass page. And the multipass is really cool because anything here we can have on separate layers. So if we were starting to make things more advanced, we have reflections in the scene, for example, we could have reflections on a separate layer, or transparencies, or highlights, or so many different things here, or you can just have the whole lot on. But the one I'm interested in here is the object buffer, and I'm going to make sure that that is on number 1 and it matches this one, which is fine for the minute. I've only got one object buffer, but you can soon get confused if you start working with tens or hundreds of object buffers. And a really nice feature is you can also rename the name of this object buffer. So I could double click on that and call this cup buffer, and that will give me a object buffer inside After Effects called cup buffer, and it will also keep the buffer number, so I know exactly which object buffer this refers to. The other one I'm going to add is a shadow layer, because certain things are quicker to manipulate inside After Effects, such as softening of shadows or changing how hard a shadow is, those sort of things. So I'm going to say give me that information on a separate layer. So once I've done that, I need to remember to hit save, so just Command S, and then we can have a look inside After Effects and then just set up things so it's working a little bit nicer. So I'll just go and find After Effects, and once we're inside After Effects we should see that not a lot has changed, because all we've done is change some render settings. So we need to do a little bit of work inside After Effects to get things looking as we want them to. So things that we need to do in here is we need to get access to those extra layers that we had, and they're called Cinema 4D multipass. So we activate those, and we activate define multipasses and choose add image layers, and what you will then get is 2 have been added. So we've got the cup buffer and the shadow layer, and these are on separate layers, and you can see that now we have this mask, black and white, that we can then use to get just the cup. So what you need to do that is use the track map modes here. So we use LumaMat, so we choose the original Cinema 4D file, and we're going to use LumaMat, and then we also need to turn the layer back on because it had hidden it, just to show us the cup buffer. And now look what we've got. We've got the cup, we've got the shadow, and we've got our original footage, which is really cool, and that will happen right the way through the movie, which is brilliant. The other thing that we have as well is the shadow layer, and we can adjust shadows as well, which I'm going to show you in just a bit, but I want to go back to Cinema 4D and show you some other stuff first, and then we're going to work with these layers in a minute. But I just want to show you that's how quick, when you know what you're doing, you can get a shadow that appears as though it's on the original movie, which is really cool. So let's go back to Cinema 4D and have a look at some of the other things that we can do. Now, animation is also something that a lot of people want to do, and they want to do it nice and fast. To help you do that, what you could do is hide the plane so you can see it landing on the pitch, but I want to see the shadow and how that interacts. I'm going to leave it on. But if you want to hide any objects, you can use these little icons here. The top one will hide it in the editor, and the bottom one will hide it in the renderer. So red is off and grey is on, and green can override if it's in a hierarchy, but I'm going to leave it on for the minute. So to animate is really simple inside Cinema 4D. So what you can do is move to, say for example, where the camera stops panning, so about here. So this is a very basic time slider that I've got here, so very simple time tools that for the most part you can use to start things off and just get things looking nice. So I'm going to move it to there, and I'm going to say at that point I want the cup to be there on the pitch. At that rotation, that's great, it matches my null, lovely. And if you use these tools here, these can be used to record position, scale, rotation, parameters and points, and you can turn any of these off. I'm just going to leave them on just for this example. But if I hit record, there's a tiny little blue icon there that appears, or icon or block or whatever you want to call it, and that means that a keyframe has been added to this object in the timeline. And of course we can go more complicated with a timeline, which we'll have a look at in a bit. But then what I'm going to do is rewind to the start of the movie, and I'm going to move the cup. So I'll move the cup up into the sky, and I'm also going to rotate it. So I choose the rotate tool, and I'm going to rotate it this way. If you would prefer to work with numbers, you can do that as well. You can type in numbers here. So I could say I want it bang on -90 degrees if I want, but I like working by eye, so I'm going to do it so it looks like that. And then I do exactly the same thing, just record active objects. And that quick, I have animation for my scene, which is really, really cool. And I can move that animation data around. If I decide actually I want the cup to land slightly after the camera stops, I can move that, and now it will change that timing so it lands there. So it's that quick to start working with animation, that simple, with Cinema 4D, which is really cool. So that's one thing that people want to do. They want to bring in a 3D model. So I've showed you where you get them from, how you bring them in, how you get them working so they look nicely inside After Effects. That's one popular use of this workflow when you want to add 3D to the tool. Notice all the shadows are calculated automatically for us, which is great. The second most popular thing is to work with logos. So many people want to create a 3D logo, and that's really simple as well. So what I'm going to do in this case, I'll just move to there in the timeline just so we can see what's going on, and I'm going to bring in a logo. So to do that, use the merge command. A merge command will basically allow you to add stuff to this scene rather than open it into a new scene. So I'm going to merge, and I'm going to go to the desktop again, and I'm going to use an EPS logo. So Cinema 4D can load in EPS logos, so if you've created stuff with Illustrator, you can get this in quite nicely. So there's my EPS, and I choose open. I will then get an Adobe Illustrator import, so I can choose how to scale it up. Do I want to connect the splines? Splines is our word for paths, so if you're a bit confused, that's what we call them, splines. So they're like paths in 3D space. So I can choose a scale mode. If I just choose OK, in comes my logo. Now the logo will come in the position that you set it up inside Illustrator, so if it's slightly off center, that's how it will come into Cinema 4D. But it's really easy to position it, so I can just set it to 0, or I could drag it into the track null again and put it 0, 0, 0. So when I do that, it looks at the parent object, in this case the null, and says, okay, position it so it's bang at the same point as the null. I'll drag it out again. So I have this logo in the scene, and I can move it up exactly the same way as I had before. I can scale it, I can do all sorts of stuff with it. So scale it there, and just put it in the scene so it's there. Now at the minute this is just a set of paths, so if I hit render I won't see it. So I need to do something with this to make it into a 3D logo. So the different tools that we've got here allow you to adjust or utilize a path or splines and either spin them around, move across a profile along another profile. You can extrude, so that'll take a logo like this and make it 3D, which is what we want to do. Loft and all sorts of different tools here. So I'm going to use the extrude. And again, the workflow is always the same with Cinema 4D. These tools, if you want them to affect something, you drag what you want them to affect inside them. So we take the logo that we brought in and drag and drop it onto the extrude NURBS. I missed, so I'll try that again. And it needs to be sitting inside, so you'll then get this little plus icon to show it's inside. And initially, nothing happens, and this is a little catch out for if you were using a logo that's made of multiple paths like this one. If you have that and you want to use an extrude NURBS, there's a option that you need to click, and inside the extrude NURBS it's called hierarchical. If we turn that on, we then get the extrude logo, which is great. Another problem that you can have, so we're looking through this After Effects camera, is okay, I've got a logo but I can't really see that well how 3D that logo is. It'd be quite nice to go in and see the finer detail. And the good news is you can switch to a Cinema 4D camera if you want instead by turning off this icon here. So if I turn that one off, I'll then go to the editor camera, and then to move around I use the 1 key and drag to move left, right, up and down, the 2 and drag to move forwards and backwards, and the 3 to rotate, and it will rotate around where your mouse is, so wherever you click, so like so, and I'll just move here, and now I can see that my logo is actually pretty thin, so I actually want that a bit thicker. So to do that is really simple. You make sure the extrude NURBS is selected, and then we change this property here to 100. So these refer to the X, which is left and right in Cinema 4D, the Y, which is up and down, and the Z, which is forwards and backwards. So I'm saying 100 centimeters on the Z axis, and that makes my logo thicker. Another nice thing about Cinema 4D, if we have a look at that logo, and this is typical if you try and create some 3D text in After Effects, for example, is you get very hard edges. And the nice thing with Cinema 4D is the caps of the extrude NURBS, you have access to fillet cap, which enables you to have nice rounding on the caps. So you can see I've got a step of 1, so I've got a bit of rounding, but I can up those steps. I can also change the radius if I want. So I've just upped them to 3, and you can see I've got this nice rounding on the edge there, which is really cool. There's also other different things you can do. You can do different fillet types. So for example, I could have engraved, have a slightly different option there, but the standard one, convex, is the most popular, just for a nice bit of rounding on the edge of the logo. So that's great. I've got my logo there, and then at any point if I want to flick back to the After Effects camera, I just click that icon there. So I've got my text in the scene, and let's have a little look at it now. So that's great. So what would be nice now is to do something with this logo, to fly it in, or do something with it. And that's what I'm going to do here. Now we could animate this the same way as we animated the cup. Actually, we should just check, does this all move to After Effects? I'll just give you a quick flick. So we hit save and we go to After Effects, and ta-da, so the logo's there. Now you'll notice something funny there, that the logo, it looks odd, and that's because it's not on the object buffer at the minute. So we could either have the object buffer as it is, or we could set up a new one inside After Effects, and we'll fix that in a minute. But you can see the shadow is there, but we just need to sort that out. So what we could do is just go, oops, not that one. We could go to Cinema 4D, and we could add that object buffer to this by simply selecting this one and Control Drag Drop, and hit save again and go back to After Effects, and that should fix it. Or we could add a second object buffer, and we're going to do that in a little bit and do different things with it. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'll just delete that object buffer for the minute, so I don't want to do that, and I'll show you why in a moment. Okay, so I've got the text here. Now, so we've seen one simple way of animating. Another way that you can animate is to use different other animation tools, and Cinema 4D is really well known for doing motion graphics tools, and it's got a tool set called MoGraph, which is accessed up here. Now, when you originally get light, if you're working with light, you won't have any MoGraph tools whatsoever. But if you want to do the next bit of the demo, you need to register the software. So when you launch Light for the first time, it'll say, do you want to launch the software? And then you will have access to lots of different things. Well, not lots, 3 tools. It says the fracture object, the plane effector, and the random effector. And you can get those when you register. So there'll be a button to register. You go and register, and they will ask you for an email address. Type in your email address, they will send you an activation code. So when you get that, you type it in, and it will activate these 3 features. You can also say, don't bother me, don't bug me, or if you'd like us to contact you with special offers, etc., you can have that as well. So it's up to you. But when you've got that and you activate it, you then have access to these 3 tools. Problem is, you don't know what these 3 tools do. So this movie will show you what those 3 tools are for, and they're really useful. So we get 3. We get fracture, effector, in effector you have plane and random. So the way these work is as follows. First of all, we create the fracture tool, and the fracture tool basically says prepare whatever I put in here ready for working with MoGraph effectors. So I have the fracture tool here, and I drag and drop the extrude NURBS inside, and initially that looks like nothing has happened, but it's basically saying get this ready for animation. And the mode that you want to select, so you select the fracture, and the mode that you always tend to use is explode segments and connect. So we have that on, and it just gets things ready for animation. So then what I need to do is make sure that fracture is activated in the Objects Manager, and I go back to MoGraph Effectors, choose plane. I then need to remember to select the fracture again, because I also want to add the effector random. And if you need to check whether that was set up right, you go to the fracture and you have a look at effectors and check that both are in there. So this is saying that both the plane and the random effector will affect the fracture object. Great. Okay, so what on earth do these do? Well, let's have a look at one. Let's have a look at the plane one first. The plane one enables you to affect a variety of different things, and these are quite common to several effectors inside MoGraph, but you can affect things like the position, the scale, the rotation, and all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff to them. So what I'm going to do on this one is just affect a few different things. So I'm going to set the position to 3000, and that's shot off screen. So think, okay, what exactly are you doing? The other thing I'm going to do is turn on rotation, and I'm going to say 90, 90, 90, and you're thinking, okay, well, what's going on? Here's the interesting thing. If we go to the effector page here and we change the strength, look what happens. We get the logo fly in. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we could animate that? Well, anywhere in the attributes you've got these little grey circles, and if we click and control click on any of those, it will add a keyframe. So what we could say is, okay, where the cup lands, just after that, we quite like to have the logo be there. So we can say control click, and then what you'll see then is the little grey circle goes red, which is great. So it said, okay, I've added a keyframe for you there. If we then scrub back to the start of the timeline, we can say, okay, at that point, be at 100%, so it's going to be 3000 up and at 90, 90, 90 on the rotation, and we hit control click again. And that quick, we have quite a complicated animation movement. And also what is nice is the following. You can stack effectors, so we've also got this random effector to play with now, so we can have a look at that. So remember, that's the second effector, and you can stack as many effectors as you want, but of course with light you only have a couple, but it's just to give you a taster, and they are very powerful anyway. So we've got this movement going on. Let's have a look at the random effector and see what we can do with that one. So the random side of things, if we have a little look at that, we've got the ability to affect different things again. So we could, for example, change things like, let's give some big crazy numbers, so let's say 5,000, 200 and 300, and I'm also going to say play around with head in, pitch and bank, and it's basically got this weird rotation thing here. Now here's the interesting thing. Now we've got that, let's do the same thing, and we'll go to the strength, and look what happens. We get this nice look. Now the thing that you can also check here is you've got to play with those settings, and what's lovely with Cinema 4D's entire system is it's all non-linear, which means you can adjust something even though you've already set something up, and just keep playing. And one of the things you can do, for example, we could say maybe we need more on the Z to stop them intersecting. So let's go back and try that. We think, okay, that's still not, we're still getting a bit of collision. And if you're getting that, there's also the seed option here, which gives you different basic calculations of how those are going together. So you just play with those until you get one that doesn't collide with each other. So that looks cool. And of course we can do exactly the same thing here. So we can say, okay, when the logo comes in, we want the strength to be at 0. So we can hold down the keyframe there again, control click, go to the start, change the strength to 100, and control click, and let's have a look what's going on. Now we've got this awesome looking animation on that text, very, very fast. So hopefully this gives you an idea of the sort of stuff you can do with MoGraph. Of course, I'm only scratching the surface here, and we've got way more powerful tools in the more advanced Cinema 4Ds, but it's great that for the cost of your Adobe After Effects CC subscription, you're getting access to this set of 3D tools that can do an awful lot, which is great. And all of this stuff is automatically translated to After Effects. So what I'm going to do here is just fix the buffers while I remember. So what I could have is this text on a second object buffer, and that's really easy for us to do. We just select the tool, so I'll grab the fracture for this example, and I'll go compositing, and this time I will enable buffer 2, and then I need to go into the render settings, and I'll go to the multipass, add another object buffer, and this time I just add it as 2, and I'm going to call this text buffer. Okay, so I need to remember to save, and then I will go to After Effects, and let's just see if we can get this working nicely. So what we can do at this point is just go, give me more image layers, and you'll get some duplicates here. So I already had a shadow buffer, so I could say actually I don't need that one, I've already got one, and I could get rid of the cut buffer because I've already got a cut buffer, and I've got this new text buffer, and now I just need to play around a little bit just to set this up nicely. So the original After Effects Cinema 4D file, I'm going to right click and, sorry, no I'm not, what am I going to do? I'm going to do Command D, which will give me a copy of it. So I've got a copy of that now. I'm going to then now it's getting a bit confusing, so I'm going to rename the first one. I'm going to call it, I don't know, let's call it Cup Layer C4D. You can call it whatever you like. Rename this one, and I'll call that one Text Layer C4D. And then what I'm going to do is grab the text buffer and chuck it on top of that one. I've got a Luma there, so that should sort that one. This one I need to turn on the cut layer, I need to turn that one on, I need to turn that off. Let's just check we've got everything right. What I've basically done there is I've got the cup layer, Luma matte, then I've got the cup buffer with no Luma matte, and that's hidden, and then I have the text layer with the Luma matte and the text buffer layer on top, and then the shadow layer on top of that, and then I've got everything all on separate layers that I can play with later. So that's now cool, that's all set up as it is. So a little bit confusing there, but that's the way you need to do it. 3D layer or object layer, whatever your object is, then the buffer of that, then if you want to have separate layers, then you can say okay, text, and then the text buffer. Okay, so that's great. So let's go back to Cinema 4D. So other things that you can do is I could apply materials. So I could, for example, create a material from scratch. Inside the content browser though, if you go away to the, all the way to the top, there's presets, and with light you get loads of cameras and models that you can use, and light setups and materials. And so for example, if we look inside the materials, we could get, I don't know, a ceramic material. Let's try purple. And you can just drag that in and drag and drop it onto an object. And we should see that looks horrible, but I could fix that. So there's different material projection types you could use. So I could try, for example, cubic will probably look better. And now I've got this weird tiled effect on there. So you can do quite complicated materials. I'm just going to scrap that though and show you a different one. Create a new material from scratch, and the nice thing about the material manager is you can do things like change the colors. You can work in RGB, you can work in HSV, color tables, that sort of thing. So for example, I could choose a green like so, and then drag and drop that onto my object. I had a material on there before, which you can see there, and then I delete it, which is why I've still got the tag. So I'll just drag and drop that onto there, and then I have colored text. So it's that quick and easy to create a color. So just showing you that. Now the other thing that is popular while we're here is you can also work with ordinary text or ordinary paths that you draw yourself inside Cinema 4D. So you see, dragging on here, you have access to all of these preset shapes, or you can draw your own ones. But a really useful one is the text tool. So we just released and create that there. And just to make things a bit clearer, I'm going to rename that a fracture, and I'm going to say that's logo in MoGraph, just so I know what's going on. And we'll rename that plane to plane for logo, and we'll rename that random to random for logo, just so we know what's going on when we come to the text. Oh, this is a creaky chair, sorry. So the text itself here, if you want to have some text, you just type it in. So we'll say all the action, and we'll say all the time. So we type it in, and then to see it, you just click outside the box, and it will pick a font. You'll have access to all of the fonts on your system. Depending on how many fonts, that may take a second to load, but you get nice previews. You can pick the font. You also can play with things like the spacing and all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff in here. So I'm just going to have that as it is, and I've got the stuff in there. So there's lots of stuff you can do. Also in release 15 of Cinema 4D, if you then update that, you can have access to things like kerning, but that may only be in the upgraded versions. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that is an option. It's certainly if you upgrade to the professional versions. So we'll bang that up the y-axis, scale it up a little bit, and yeah, we've got this, and we also need to make that 3D. So we could create an extrude from scratch again, or if we wanted to use the extrude that we already had, what we could do is control drag drop that, remove the logo from inside, and then we could drag our new text into it. So there it has the same settings as this logo here. And then of course I could change that slightly, so I could go to the object, and maybe I want that text a bit thinner, so maybe 50. So I've got this in the scene here, and I'm going to show you a different effect with this. So we could, if we wanted, just bang this logo into the fracture that we've already got, because quite cool is then everything is affected by that. So it's pretty cool that you can get that done that quick, that you can add things to, you know, an effect that you've already done, and it will animate, and you know, that looks pretty cool. But you know, I'd like to give you something a little bit different, just to show you that you can do different effects in different ways. So what we're going to do in this case is I'll drag that out again, and I'm going to use a couple of different tools here. What I'm going to do at this point though is just save, and we will just flick to After Effects, check that's updating, and again we've got this problem with the buffer, so we need to add this text to that buffer as well. So we'll just fix that quickly, and in this case, you know, we can just grab this buffer here and control drag drop. So we're saying, you know, also have that in buffer too, so that text now when we go back to After Effects should also automatically be added as well, if I've done it right. Oh, I've got to hit save. Duh. Always remember to hit the save button, and then it'll update. There we go, so we've got the text in there, which is great. What I'm also going to do is add that green to this new text, so we've got that there. So I want to do a different effect here, and that's exactly what I'm going to do from this point. And the effect that I want to do, I want to create a new fracture. So I'm going to go fracture. I could use the one that I've got already, of course, but I'm going to do a new one. Drag the object in, choose mode, explode segments and connect, and then I will add some effectors again. So I'll go MoGraph effector plane, MoGraph effect, and then make sure I've selected the fracture again. Go MoGraph effector random, and just check that they are in, which they are. Great. And then what I can do is, you can see this is actually affecting it already slightly anyway. So if I have a look at the plane and the random, you can see they're doing stuff already. So let's turn off the random first, and I'm going to mess with the plane effector first. Now before, what we had was the plane effector was doing kind of like a global setting, that it would affect everything in the scene by an amount. Quite a nice thing that you can do as well is work with fall off, and you can work with different shaped fall offs, and this will basically give you an area that it will only affect stuff in there. So you can see now it's affecting not the text at all, because it's not around the text. So I can create a big box. So I think I know some settings that work, so I'm just going to, rather than manually scale up and position it, I'm just going to change this size. So I'm going to type in some numbers, 4700, 2509, just because this worked nicely when I was playing with it before. So I've got this big box here, and you can also work with orthographic views if you want. There's a little icon here, and then I can look at the orthographic views. So I can see that's really deep. It probably doesn't actually need to be that deep. So maybe we change that. So of course you can scale this as well, so we can just actually you can do a uniform scale there, or I can type in a number. So I'll make that, I don't know, 3000. There we go. So that fits a bit better, and then I'll drag it up so it's around the text. So hopefully you saw that when it jumps in, it's affecting it slightly. And I could shrink this a bit more, but just to give you the example, okay? So we've got the effect there, and we'll have a little look at the sort of stuff we can now do. So if I go to the parameters, one thing I could do is say, here's a nice little trick. If you go to scale and choose uniform scale, type -1, and that basically scales it down to nothing, which is quite cool, because now if I'm just going to see where I am in the timeline. So let's say after the Maxon appears, I want something to start happening with the logo. So if I move this out of the way, you can see that the logo is there. So what I could do is say, okay, I'll undo, and I'll hit a keyframe there on that plane effector, and then I'll say by, I don't know, by about that point I want to move this across so we can see the logo. So I just move it out of shot like so, and I'll record that, and now look what's going on. Oops, let's hit the right thing. In comes the logo, and now this other bit appears to appear, which is really cool. But what I love about Cinema 4D is I go, okay, quite like that. Let's add something to it. So I can go back to the effector here, and I can say, you know, do me some position changes. So let's say start a bit lower and appear like you're coming up. And now I'm getting this effect. And it looks, you know, it looks really cool that I'm adding this stuff. And I could also say, let's add in a flip as well. So let's do, I don't know, a rotation on the pitch as well. And now I'm getting this really cool effect. Let's just play that again for you. So we get that in, and then we get this effect. And if we focus on just that bit of the timeline, so let's have a little look. Let's scrub it and play. Getting quite a nice effect there, and it was very quick to do. You could also mess around with the settings of this box if you wanted, you know, where the position is, and change that as well if you wanted. So you can go into the timeline or move these keys about. So we should have, I think, that key there. We could drag that one across, and that'll just change the timing slightly. So if we now scrub the timeline, yeah, it's a little bit longer, so that's probably a little bit nicer. So you can play with that as much as you want, but hopefully what this shows you is you can build up effects and you can work in different ways, you know, and get some really nice stuff. And now we've got an animation that looks, oops, looks like this. Now I need to remember to just sort my timeline out, so I'll just drag this again. So I've got this coming in. I've got that coming in. And I can keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. So the other things that I can do, I can start messing with the F-curves of animations as well. I could also add a random effector on top of that as well if I wanted, you know, with this one here, and say, I don't know, affect rotation by 90, 90, 90. I have no idea what that'll look like. We could try it, but only if I want to, you know. So it's so nice that you can go, yeah, that looks nice, that doesn't look nice, oh, I'll try that, I'll try this. I can change the speed settings of things, you know, so many different things that I can do with this. So, and now this one comes in, and yeah, if I'm going to do that, I need to also remember with a random effector to change the strength so that I get that effect as well. So I need to remember to do that as well, but actually I think that looks a bit messy, so I think actually, you know what, I'm going to delete that random effect and just keep the effect that I've got so far. So I quite like that. Now another thing that you can do is change the timing of things as well. So I could say I quite like that, but I would quite like maybe a sort of kind of like a pulse on that Maxon logo. So if we have a look at that there and go and have a look at the MoGraph logo, and what do we got? We've got, so it's the plane effector. I think I want to adjust. Let's have a look. Yeah. So what I want to do here is just play with that setting, that timing inside Cinema 4D of that. So anything that's animated, you can go right click and go not there, sorry, oh sugar. Oh, there's the key, there's the key. I can say I want to have a look at the F-curve. So I go to animation, right click and say show F-curve, and this will show me that movement that we've got here, and then I could start playing with this. So I could add points. So if I just add some points quickly just so you can see that my change does something, and then if we hit play again, we see we're getting this weird effect. And we might need to play with the seed values to get this looking right again. But you can see I'm getting that. And then I can tweak that further. So there's various different tools in here that I can tweak. So I could add maybe another, let's have another one there. And move this. And move this one. And this one. And then we'll just have a quick look at that. Oops. Let's see what that's doing. So I'm getting like a little bump there, so I could scale the timeline a bit just so I focus just on that bit. I don't know, to about there. So let's just have a quick look at that. And then the lovely thing is I can just keep tweaking this. So I can say, and then there's different tools in this F-curve editor, so I could drag a box over these, for example, right click and choose auto tangents just to smooth it out a little bit. So that should give me a slightly different result again, like so, which is quite cool. And then I could do, there's another nice tool which is hidden up here, and it's called Region Tool. And if you grab that, this is really handy if you think I need to kind of scale those so it's not as big a bump. So when I've got that, you can scale stuff like so, move it across, tighten them up a bit, and it's sort of like a, you know, like scaling those points. So it's a useful tool. And then when you finish with it, you just go back to edit and go and just turn it off. So hopefully what we should see now is a little effect. And then we have this one above, and we can mess with ease in, ease out movements. So we can change the speed. So the F-curve is referring to, you know, the acceleration of it and whether it goes past and back, and you can add as much stuff to this as you want and tailor this to your heart's content. And this is all in Cinema 4D Lite. So then when you're happy with it, you just hit save, and then we go into After Effects, and we're going to carry on from there like so. Have a little look where we're at. Just let that render. And if we just skip to the, I'm just going to grab a little bit later just so we can check that the text is all cool. Come on, over there. Great. And what I'm going to show you now is a few more settings inside After Effects. So when you're into After Effects, a few final things that you're going to want to play with just to tweak your final scene and why that's cool. So we're just going to continue with that in just a moment. So inside After Effects, we've got everything really nicely set up here. We've got the cup on a separate layer with the cup buffer cutting it out nicely. We've got the text on a separate layer and the text buffer cutting that out nicely. And then we've got the shadows on a separate layer as well. So at this point you may think, great, I'm finished. Well, the lovely thing about this workflow is there's certain things that After Effects is really cool at doing that Cinema 4D can't do as fast. So for example, we may think that the shadows are too harsh, and if you've got a final rendered out movie from, you know, Cinema 4D, then you're stuck with it. It's very hard to say I want to soften those shadows because it's not on separate layers. The whole benefit of all this multi-pass and separate layer way of working is that you can tweak any aspect of any of those layers using the tools that you know best in After Effects, and you can do it across the whole movie really, really fast. So one thing that we're seeing here though, and I just want to make this clear, is when you're getting ready for your final sequence, is you may need to change a couple of settings just to get things slightly higher quality and see what's going on. So you may want to turn back to full resolution here, just so you get everything nice. And if I do that, I just want to highlight one thing, which again is something that catches some people out with Cinema 4D, and that is to do with anti-aliasing. If you are working with shadows or transparencies, you can find that the standard anti-aliasing is a bit jaggedy, particularly on the shadows. So you get nice anti-aliasing on the 3D objects, but the shadows look a bit ropey. And if you're working with shadows or you're working with transparency, it's important to change the render settings of the anti-aliasing. So if we have a quick look back inside Cinema 4D, we do that inside the render settings, and in here you want to look at the effects, sorry, not the effects, it's up here as an effect already, it's the anti-aliasing, and change it from geometry to best, and that will give you nice shadow anti-aliasing. You can also vary the quality of the anti-aliasing if you wish, but normally that works nice for most cases. A couple of other things to mention while we are here is you can go into options, and if you don't need really high detail, if you want to speed up rendering, if you don't need such a big ray depth, you can try lowering that. So that's how light is looked at in Cinema 4D, so where it's a ray tracer, so the ray fires out of a source and it's tracked around the scene, and in this case up to 15 times. So you can lower that if you don't need so complicated stuff. You can lower reflection depth, so how many reflections you'd see, so a reflection in a reflection in a reflection, that sort of thing. Again, the same with shadow depth. So all of these sort of things you can play around with and speed things up. You can turn stuff off, so they're quite nice to look at if you need to speed things up. Cinema's rendering is really fast anyway, which is why this stuff is set pretty high, but if you need to change it, you can here. So that's quite cool. The other things that are quite nice is under effects, you've got ambient occlusion, which is like a very simple global illumination. It gives basically nice shading in the corners of things, so we might see it in the corners of text or in the corner of a room, that sort of thing. So that's something you can chuck on just for a quick nice shading. So that's the other thing that's quite useful, and there's all kinds of other effects that you can play with in here. Now what you can't do is render directly out of Cinema 4D excuse me, unless you've got the full version. So if you upgrade to Broadcast or Studio, you'll be able to do your renders directly out of Cinema 4D. But with Cinema 4D Lite, you set up your settings in here, like the anti-aliasing, and you will render your project out of After Effects. So that's something to note as well. So that's cool, that's all done, that's set up. So that's the Cinema 4D scene as I want it. So I just hit the Command Save button here, and we'll go back to After Effects. Also to note, you can see I'm working on a Mac here, but Cinema 4D works on PC or Mac, so you can run it under Windows or you can run it under a Macintosh OS. And also quite nice is when you buy the product, it comes, if you upgrade to the full product, you have a dual platform installer, so you can choose to install it on Windows or on Mac. So that's quite nice as well. But Lite, of course, it depends on your After Effects CC, what that's on. So now I've upped those settings and I added the ambient occlusion. You can see that After Effects has done an update. It's a bit of a small preview, so we can't really see the fine detail, but we can see that the shadow is now much cleaner, much nicer, anti-aliasing on that, which is great. So we've got this final scene here, and what I want to show you now is some of the things that you can do inside After Effects. Now I'm sure if you're an After Effects expert, you know exactly what you can do inside After Effects, but I want to show you anyway, just to see the sort of things that you can do. So a typical problem that you have when you do 3D is you can of course see the render inside Cinema 4D and see how shadows are looking, but you may think that looks okay and then render out the sequence and then think actually those shadows are a bit too hard. Now if you've got the shadow layout inside After Effects, you can adjust that really easily. So we can go and get, for example, the opacity, so the shortcut is T, and then adjust the opacity on the fly. And you can see, okay, that's not looking great at the minute, so it's still too harsh. But what I could do is then mix that with a few effects. So I could go effect, and I could try, for example, CC toner, and then grab the highlights and just pick some colors from the scene that, you know, just make it that little bit cleaner. Not cleaner, you know, just changes the color just slightly. And then I could also try a blur. So one thing that can take quite a long time to calculate in Cinema 4D or any 3D tool are blurred shadows and blurred reflections, and having the stuff on separate layers means you can do that very fast inside After Effects. And of course you can, because it's real time, you can see exactly the result that you want, as opposed to have to wait to render to see what the effect is like in Cinema 4D. So doing the blur of your shadows in here is quicker, and you can get exactly the result that you're after. So I'll just ramp up the blur, and now you can see I've got this nice blurred shadow that's looking a lot nicer than I had before. And of course I can just play with the opacity and just get exactly the look that I'm after. So that looks okay to me, those shadows. Could maybe even blur them more, you know, it's up to you. So maybe something like that, maybe really fade them. But it's lovely to have that control, and of course that's done over the entire movie. So that's one nice thing that you can do by having things like shadows on separate layers. We could also have a look at the cup layer, and you know, maybe we want to play a little bit with that. So again, we could try just an experiment with the blur, which might or might not improve things. No, we're losing the detail on the edge there, so probably not. But we could play with other bits and bobs in here. So we could have a look at the HSV, and just see if we wanted a slightly different colour to the cup. Just to try and match it a little bit better to the scene. You could do that if you wanted, or just delete it. I just want to show you that you can basically have control over just that area without affecting anything else, which is quite nice, like so. We could also do exactly the same thing to the text, and what I love about the text is, of course, here's a typical problem where you may render out the text and think, oh no, I can't actually see that all the time very well because it's caught up in that highlight that's sitting above the stadium there, that glow. And the nice thing is, because we've got it on a separate layer, we can adjust that. So if we go for the HSV again, or hue saturation, we can change it and look for a colour that actually works with the colours that we've got. I think probably a red will stand out, and if I bang up the saturation, that looks a bit better to me. You could try darkening it, so now we can see that text. And the awesome thing is that that is done right the way through the movie. So and if you then go back to Cinema 4D and maybe you change the text itself, all these changes that you've done in After Effects, because they're simply on the layers, will remain. So if I change what that text says, I'll keep this color correction and all these changes automatically, even if the shadows all change. So it's a really nice way of working. And then from this point, of course, you then just render out your project at the settings that you wish to have, and you're done. So you could see, hopefully, that there's a lot of power that you get with After Effects CC and Cinema 4D Lite, and hopefully this movie gives you the tools and the knowledge you need to get started in playing with it. If you ever want to go up to one of the more commercial versions of Cinema 4D, there are upgrade paths to Cinema 4D Broadcast and also Cinema 4D Studio. Now those tools will give you more options in terms of tools at your disposal, and you can see an exact feature comparison by having a look at the Maxon.net website and have a look at the Cineware/Cinema 4D Lite page, and on there is an upgrade white paper, which I'll just show you. And what that tells you is about basically the extra things that you could get when you upgrade to Broadcast or Studio. So that's quite nice to have. So you can see you can have things like more MoGraph tools if you upgrade to Broadcast, polygon modeling tools. You can also have physical rendering, so more realistic rendering, particle systems, so you can have streams of objects. You can have stereoscopic rendering, so you can do stereo 3D visuals. There's a full dynamic system for MoGraph objects, which means the objects you create in MoGraph can collide with each other, not intersect, bash into each other. And you can also do more complicated camera moves, so that's what you get with Broadcast. And on top of that, if you then go to Studio, you add things like physics simulations, so you can recreate soft objects like jelly or cloth or stuff like that, and also interesting interactions between physical objects. You can create engines and things like that. You can do advanced character animation. You can create hair. You can do sculpting, where you can use a set of tools to, funny enough, sculpt something. You can do non-photo real rendering with Sketch and Toon, and there's also a network rendering system called Team Render, which makes it easy to render out your animations or stills over a network. So they are your upgrade options, and if you want to do that, just contact your local Maxon representative. If you're not sure where that is in your country, what you do is you go to maxon.net, choose order, and then you can either see US, UK, or international distributors here, and then just pick your country, and then you'll see your particular distributor. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a good overview of what Cinema 4D Lite is, where you find it in Adobe After Effects CC, and that you can upgrade to more professional versions if you wish. And you can also use this workflow if you have Broadcast or Studio already, but you will need the latest version to do that. And hopefully that was a useful movie to you. If it was, please give us a thumbs up. That's always appreciated. If you're watching this on YouTube, and any comments are also much appreciated. Thank you very, very much for watching, and yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.